So you think you're on top of the news, right? You think you've got a grip on what's happening, and then bam, something like this total curveball.
It really is remarkable when you think about it.
Yeah, I mean, we're going deep on this whole USAID thing.
The U.S. Agency for International Development,
Yeah, USAID, but basically they tried to dismantle the entire thing.
and orchestrated by a pretty new department too, right?
Exactly. Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency. DOGE.
The OGE, led by, well, someone you wouldn't exactly call a government insider.
That's putting it mildly. And to top it all off, a federal judge just stepped in and hit the pause button on this whole DOGE operation.
It is unprecedented.
Totally. So the big questions we're grappling with today are, well, how did we even get here? How did we reach a point where such a drastic measure was even considered, let alone attempted?
Right.
And what happens now? What are the ripple effects, not just for the U.S.'s global standing, but for, the actual delivery of humanitarian aid worldwide?
Those are the key questions, absolutely. To really understand the weight of this, we need to go back. We need to look at how DOGE came to be, what Elon Musk's role is in all of this, the nuts and bolts of how they went about dismantling USI, and the legal arguments that led to the judge's intervention.
Right, and we've got a ton of recent articles and reports that we're going to be pouring over to break this all down.
Yeah, it's a lot to unpack.
So our mission today is pretty clear, I think. We got to understand where Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency, this DOGE, even came from, how Musk is involved, the specifics of how USAID was targeted, the legal challenge that brought it to a screeching halt, and the bigger picture implications.
You got it.
Okay, so let's rewind. This Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, it wasn't always around, right?
No, it's a pretty recent creation, actually. 2025, during the Trump administration.
Trump. Wow, okay.
The basic idea was to streamline federal operations, get rid of anything redundant or overlapping, and just make the whole government machine run more efficiently.
Make it lean and mean.
Exactly.
Okay, and then they bring in Elon Musk, the tech titan, but not exactly your typical public administrator. What was the logic there? What were they hoping he'd bring to the table?
Well, the administration's line was all about injecting fresh thinking into the government. They wanted someone with a reputation for shaking things up, for getting results, even if it meant ditching the old ways of doing things.
The disruptor.
Exactly. Musk's track record with ambitious projects, his whole forward-thinking approach, it probably resonated with those who wanted to see a real shakeup in how the government used its resources and just functioned day to day.
And pretty quickly, USAID, the very agency we're talking about, became a prime target for these efficiency drives. Why single out foreign aid?
Well, USAID has a big budget, a huge global presence. It probably looked like low-hanging fruit for cost-cutting and finding efficiencies.
Prime target.
Right. There were definitely criticisms swirling around at the time about how effective USAID was, how the money was being spent. Some folks even argued for a more, a more direct approach, maybe something more domestically focused when it came to managing resources.
Interesting.
These viewpoints, while controversial, they probably played a role in DOGE, identifying USAID as an area ripe for streamlining and budget cuts.
Okay, but right off the bat, when Musk's appointment was announced, there were red flags, right? It wasn't all sunshine and roses.
Oh, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Critics jumped on his lack of experience in government, especially in these really sensitive areas, diplomacy, international development, that kind of thing.
Right.
And then the sheer amount of authority that DOGE had under Musk, it raised concerns about, too much power concentrated in one place and not enough checks and balances.
Too much or too fast.
Yeah, and this context is super important for understanding what happened next.
Okay, so DOGE is born, Musk is at the helm, and USAA is in the crosshairs. What did this streamlining actually look like for the people on the ground, the people working at and with USAA?
Well, under Musk's orders, DOGE went in, and they moved pretty quickly, pretty drastically to dismantle USAID aid.
Like how drastic?
There were massive layoffs, both direct employees and a whole bunch of contractors who were crucial for running all these USAID programs around the world.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a big deal.
I mean, you can't just shut down a global organization like that without some serious consequences.
Exactly. The immediate fallout was that tons of global aid programs just stopped. Initiatives, public health, infrastructure development, emergency relief efforts. So many things just ground to a halt.
Frozen in place.
Yeah, and it left this huge void in places that desperately needed support.
And this is impacting real people, vulnerable populations who rely on this assistance in some cases to survive.
Absolutely. It wasn't just some administrative reshuffling. It directly impacted essential support. food, medicine, shelter.
It's life or death for some people.
It is, and this whole thing really damaged the U.S.'s reputation as a leader in international aid and development. For decades, USAID have been a cornerstone of American soft power, a real tangible expression of our humanitarian commitment.
Yeah, and to just pull the rug out from under all of that, it's got to have sent shockwaves through the international community.
You're absolutely right. The world was watching, and they were alarmed, to say the least. A major provider of aid just suddenly withdrawing. It impacted those receiving aid directly, of course, but it also raised serious questions among our allies and partners. Can the U.S. be trusted? Can we rely on them? Is their foreign policy even predictable anymore?
Those are some serious doubts to be sowing.
And when a key partner seems unreliable, it forces other nations to reevaluate, to start looking for other options to meet those critical needs.
So with all this happening, with all this disruption and global uncertainty, we see a legal challenge emerge. Who steps up to fight this dismantling?
A group of current and former USAID employees, over 24 of them, decided to take legal action. They filed a lawsuit arguing that the whole process of shutting down the agency was unconstitutional.
Bold move. What was their main argument, legally speaking? What specific parts of the Constitution were they saying were being violated?
The heart of their argument was that Elon Musk, leading DOGE, was basically exercising huge authority over a federal agency without going through the Senate confirmation process that's normally required for these kinds of positions with real power.
Checks and balances.
Exactly. They were saying he went way beyond an advisory role, that he was acting with unchecked executive power. And they argued this violated the separation of powers and the Appointments Clause of the Constitution.
And a federal judge, Judge Theodore Chuang, agreed with them, at least in part. He issued a preliminary injunction. Now, for those of us who aren't legal scholars, what does that actually mean? A preliminary injunction?
It's basically a timeout called by the court. It's a temporary order that stops a specific action while the legal case is still being heard. In this situation, Judge Chuang ordered an immediate halt to the dismantling of USAID.
Okay, so a real roadblock for DOGE. But what are the broader implications of this whole situation? Even if the legal battle ultimately goes in DOGE's favor, what about the domestic consequences?
Domestically, I think this has definitely fueled concerns about executive power. The idea that a department led by someone who hasn't gone through the usual checks and balances like Senate confirmation could just come in and completely change the way a long-standing agency works, well, it's unsettling for a lot of people.
I can see why.
It raises really fundamental questions about accountability in government and where the lines are, where the limits are on administrative authority in our system.
Huge questions. And internationally, with USAID's global reach and the kind of work they do, the fallout seems even more significant.
Oh, it is. The disruption has created a real vacuum in global humanitarian efforts. Millions of people depended on U.S. aid for things like basic health care, food security, and they've been hit hard by this.
It's a real blow.
And this sudden withdrawal, it can be destabilizing, especially in regions that are already struggling. Plus, as we said before, the uncertainty about the U.S.'s commitment to international aid going forward, it's causing a lot of anxiety among our allies and partners. It weakens relationships, it chips away at American influence globally.
So where does this leave USAA now? How are they navigating this whole mess?
They're essentially in rebuilding mode, but they're doing it with this court injunction hanging over their heads. They have to reactivate programs that were shut down, rehire staff, and rebuild trust, both with their own people and with their international partners. It's a long road back.
And the legal battle isn't over, right? The administration is pushing back on this ruling.
That's right. They've made it clear they're going to appeal Judge Chuang's preliminary injunction. So the whole question of whether it was constitutional to dismantle USA, that's still up for debate in the higher courts.
Still up in the air.
Yeah, and the future of USA, its structure, its independence, it's all still very much uncertain.
It really highlights a fundamental tension in how we govern, doesn't it? On one hand, there's this push for efficiency, for cutting costs, which is understandable. But on the other hand, you have these constitutional principles, these checks and balances that are the bedrock of our government.
Absolutely. This case is a big flashing warning sign about the dangers of unchecked executive power. It's a reminder that efficiency, as important as it is, cannot come at the cost of the legal and democratic principles that protect our whole system of government.
It's a stark lesson.
It is.
So, to sum up, what we've seen with this attempted dismantling of USAID by DOGE, it really exposes the risks of concentrating power in the hands of a few. It reminds us that we have these constitutional safeguards for a reason.
Couldn't agree more. And as this whole saga plays out, I think it's a call to action for all of us. We need to have a conversation, a national conversation, about the values that drive public service, about the strength and, maybe also the fragility of the mechanisms we have in place to protect our democratic institutions. The fact that this went to court, that there was pushback, it shows that our system of checks and balances is working, that it's resilient.
It does.
And it's worth thinking about, right?
It is.
How quickly DOGE was created, the speed at which they moved to dismantle a major agency, the legal fight that followed. What does it tell us about the strength, but also the potential weaknesses of our government in the face of rapid change and concentrated power?
It's a lot to chew on, some serious food for thought. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive today. It's been enlightening, to say the least.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.